Hello, Internet! Welcome to episode 165 of the Assorted Calibers podcast. The Second Amendment podcast is a little bit for everyone. I'm Weer'd, and with me, as always, is the most lovely hostess in the entire world, Aaron Paulette. How you doing, Aaron?
I'm gonna gain so much weight from this ice cream, I swear.
Tell me about the ice cream.
Well, first of all, it's Haagen-Dazs, the wonder drug. Secondly, they have come out with a subline known as Spirits, which does have alcohol in it. Now, admittedly, it's only a tiny percent, half of 1% alcohol by volume, but it tastes delightful. And I've tried many of them, and I think you might enjoy the whiskey hazelnut latte. I had it. It was pretty good. My absolute favorite is Irish cream brownie.
Ooh.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. Oh, God. Oh, jeez.
So there's some interesting chemistry involved in all this. Like, I remember when I was younger, I was watching a cooking show with my mom, and somebody was making vodka sauce. And I'm like, but wait a second, isn't vodka just alcohol and water? And then you get the tomato sauce going, and you're just going to be boiling it, and as soon as water boils, the alcohol's long gone. So what's the point of vodka sauce? And the reason is that when the alcohol gets in, it will dissolve. Alcohol is a solvent, and it will dissolve different things than water dissolves. And so it'll free certain compounds from, say, the tomatoes or the seasonings or all that. So you will get a slightly different flavor profile. And that is probably one of the reasons why it is so delightful, is that little bit of alcohol in there is not only giving you the flavor of whatever spirit they're putting into it, but also it is liberating some flavors from the fudge brownie and the various other ingredients in the ice cream.
Yeah. If you like ice cream at all, I recommend this. I've yet to find one of these that's bad, but that one's just my absolute favorite. I need to be careful, or I will just eat an entire container in one sitting. 14 ounces, gone.
Back when my wife lived in Cambridge and I was still living in Portland, and I'd come down and see her, we would frequently go to an ice cream shop. I believe it's in Kendall Square. I think it's like right on the edge of like Kendall and Central Square. But it was right near MIT, called Toscanini's. And unfortunately, it was just one time. I mean, they make their own ice cream there, so they'll have one. They'll have one recipe up, and then a month later it's gone. And but they had one that was a bourbon chip, and it was like cinnamon bourbon chip or something. I think it was like cinnamon chips with bourbon in a vanilla ice cream. It was so good. It was so good. I want it again. And I've had other bourbon infused ice creams, and they've never come close.
I'd like to point out that Haagen-Dazs makes a bourbon vanilla bean truffle ice cream.
I'm in. I will look for this the next time I'm at the grocery store. Next time I'm in your groceries freezer section.
So that's what I'm doing. I'm surviving the Florida heat by inhaling mildly alcoholic ice cream. How are you doing, Weer'd?
I'm doing all right. I will take this moment on the normally Weer'd will complain about the heat or the cold of New England, but I'll say for whatever reason New England has decided, you know what, we're just gonna make it nice. It is low humidity and in the mid to high 70s, and has been for the last 3 days. And even the we'll throw a curveball in there I was over at a friend's house, and suddenly it just started raining on us, and it was just a light summertime rain, And I was like, oh God, here I am at my friend's house, and I left all the skylights open in my house, but it was a light rain, and there was no wind whatsoever, and so skylights, they don't let rain in unless it's blowing. So I didn't say anything to my wife, and then when we got home, I quietly walked under each of the skylights. I was like, okay, we're all right. So New England weather, it is smiling upon me.
I had no idea you had skylights.
Yeah.
Aren't you fancy?
I mean, I am. I remember at one point I was talking with Oddball, and I said, "Oh, hold on a second. I gotta go. I've got to go. Finish making my hamburger buns." He's like, "You're making hamburger buns?" "Yeah, I'm making hamburger buns." And he said, "Hey, everybody, Weer'd's too fancy for hamburger buns you buy at the store." And then as I was eating that hamburger that night, I was going, you know what? I am too fancy for hamburger buns at the store. I can be fancy.
I would think that perhaps the amount of snowfall you get might preclude skylights, but
no, it doesn't. I mean, you can always. They're all on the first floor, so I don't have any like skylights that are like way up in the stratosphere. But yeah, so those would be very easy to roof rake, but we almost never get like that much snow built up on them so that they're going to collapse. And they're fairly rugged. I mean, you don't want to stand on them when you're out cleaning the gutters.
And hey, if necessary, you can always do a superhero landing through them just to be super dramatic.
Yes. I mean, you've got to.
So you know what else is super dramatic right now?
What's that?
The current state of NYSERPA versus Bruin.
Yes. Oh God, we were talking about this before the show, and oh my goodness, like
I want to point out now that there are still no amicus briefs filed in favor of New York State. Mm-hmm. Now, there are two that are filed in defense, in favor, whatever, of neither party, which is just some people going, I want the Supreme Court to read my thoughts. But other than those two, every single one is in favor of the plaintiff. I mean, okay, this is New York State, which is where Bloomberg makes his home. You would think that Bloomberg, who loves him gun control, would have one of his pet organizations, or all of them, file in favor of New York State. But no, I mean, and Brady, Giffords, they've all been really quiet. Why are they staying the heck out of this?
I mean, the only thing I could speculate is I ended up just to try to see, just so, because you're like, is there any? And I'm like, no, I don't think there is. But I'm like, you know what? I'm doing some searching. And I did a whole ton of searching. And the only gun control amicus briefs for NYSERPA are NYSERPA versus the city of New York, which was the case that was mooted by the courts when New York just said, you know what, rather than lose this, we'll just change the law. Mm-hmm. And so literally, I think because, I mean, that's a pretty big burn. That is very similar to the speculation of the David Sandman case, the guy that, allegedly, glared at the Native American in Washington.
He smirked at him.
Yes. And he sued it was CNN, I believe. Yeah, he sued CNN for defamation, and CNN. There's lots of speculation on what the settlement was, but CNN definitely settled with him out of court, and one of the big discussions that I always saw about that was they were paying to make sure that the court never went to discovery. And same thing can be said about this is they did. If this is, I mean, gun control people are super mad that this got mooted because, I mean, yes, it was a victory for us, but we wanted to take it to the courts because if there's a Supreme Court ruling, then it can be used to apply to other states saying, no, this behavior is not allowed. And instead they just kind of said, we're going to stop doing it. It's not that there's no court ruling. So just because they changed their behavior doesn't mean that anyone said that what they were doing was wrong. And that's that's not great. But that was the same thing. They did not want that to happen. Much better that they changed their law that they fought tooth and nail to keep until the very, very end and then change it, than get it so that other states would be cursing their name.
And so you happened upon an article that I hadn't yet seen, and support for NYSERPA has come from an unexpected source. Public defenders. What's up with that?
I mean, it's literally what we've been saying. They're pointing out the fact that gun control is disproportionately affecting people of color and people of lower social economic status. And so, yeah, they're like, this is a crappy law. And
in fact, one of the articles you linked is to The Nation, and they are very, very, very anti-gun, such to the point that the article calls us homosexuals. But even they had to grudgingly admit that the people filing this brief had a point. They hate saying it, but it's true.
Yeah, I mean, I've got it linked in the show notes. I actually lost this article for just a second. I forgot to put it in the show notes, and I ended up closing the tab by accident. And Aaron, you were like, "Oh, I see this is written in the show notes, but I'm not seeing the link to it." Oh, I'll dig it up. And I'm like, "Oh crap, I can't find it again." And Aaron Paulette is a big deal, and you managed to find it. Well, you found the Reason article, and I grabbed some of the quotes from that, and that was able to find the article that I had previously seen. And I specifically wanted this one because it's great news that more and more people are piling up behind NYSERPA, and none of the anti-gun groups are doing so, or the anti-gun politicians. But how just blatantly partisan this article is. Like, I could not find like a single paragraph here where there isn't some sort of stink or slime against either gun owners or conservatives or all that. It's a very, very partisan, you could argue extremist article, a webpage author. But even then, they still had to sit back and go, but they do have a point. And I think this is a sign of, again, gun control becoming nonpartisan again. It used to be that there was not stark lines drawn in the sand that, Republicans are the party of gun rights, titter titter, and Democrats are the gun banners. Also titter titter, but now, but it's still the lines are there. The politicians that are campaigning for common sense gun control are all Democrats in the last few elections, and the people that are supporting our Second Amendment rights and walking around with their duck gun or even an AR-15 in their campaign ads are almost always Republicans. And I think it didn't used to be that way, and I think it's going to be going back the other direction, because when you have an article that is so partisan as this, and yet against gun control, that's a big crack in the armor.
I want to read two paragraphs from the Nation article. What's even more depressing is that the public defenders make an excellent case. They argue that New York's gun licensing requirements unconstitutionally deprive poor people of their rights to bear arms and give law enforcement an excuse to harass and incarcerate otherwise law-abiding black and brown citizens, severely penalizing them for the kind of minor misconduct white people routinely get away with. They're not wrong. Oh, it must have burned to have said that. Continuing, the public defenders calculate that it costs around $400 to get a gun permit in New York, plus a whole lot of time that is disproportionately difficult for the working poor to find. I don't tend to think of private gun ownership as a constitutional right, but if you do, gating access to that right behind a $400 fee and an enormous time sink is not something we do for other constitutional principles. End quote. Wow. Okay, not everyone who has filed an AC brief is taking this tactic, but so many are. And it seems like there is such a weight of New York's, justifiable cause law being misogynist, racist, homophobic, transphobic, and all of these other negative things, I have to confess a bit of a worry. And I worry that the state of New York might do the exact same thing that the city of New York did. Because, well, right now, New York State is being put into a very, very bad position. And it's basically, well, it's the equivalent of have you stopped beating your wife?
Mm-hmm.
Because either they have to admit that, yeah, fine, these policies are racist and sexist and classist, and we're fine with that, in which case a lot of people are going to lose their jobs next election, or they have to choose, to them, the equally unsavory choice of saying, fine, we'll go shell issue. And I worry that a lot of politicians in Albany are going, we're really getting tired of being ruled by the city down south. Maybe we should just withdraw this so that we don't lose the case and there isn't a SCOTUS ruling, and we'll just quietly fix this. And I mean, I quite obviously hope they don't. I very clearly want their asses whooped.
Yeah.
But just considering the weight behind this, again, no one has come in on their side. I wonder if they're thinking of capitulating.
Yeah, especially when, we note that, like in Heller versus DC, they didn't strike down everything. They didn't strike down the NFA. They didn't, strike down Gun Control Act of '68. No, they were very, very, very gentle in their ruling. And they didn't make it so that constitutional carry was the law of the land, and that carry permits were also infringements on our right. They literally just said, no, you can own a firearm in working order in your home in DC. And then later, McDonnell versus Chicago, that it also applied to the states as well as just the federal government as a whole. But when you look at like the concealed carry maps, we're damn near half the country is constitutional carry, and then furthermore the bulk of the rest is shall issue. So the number of may issue states is so minuscule, and they all have the exact same problem. Honestly speaking, the only one that doesn't have that problem is Hawaii, where Hawaii just says no. You can't find, some coffee bean magnate that has their carry permit or all that. It's not like I haven't seen it in a while. I haven't really looked for it, but it used to be there was some publication in New York City would every year publish everybody who had a carry permit in the city of New York. They would file a Freedom of Information Act and get the names. And it was like Howard Stern and Robert De Niro and Donald Trump and somebody who is, if you didn't recognize their name immediately, it'd be like, so and so, I don't know who that is, head of Bear Stearns. Oh, I know what that is. Head of this, this studio, head of this record label and all that. It was always somebody who had a lot of money and a lot of power. And at least in the case of like Hawaii, it's just like, no, we're just not going to give carry permits. We just don't do that. But everybody else is absolutely doing the whole power broker, pay to play thing. So the possibility that this case might, I'm not saying it would for sure, but it's small enough, the number of may issue states, that it could potentially strike them all down. So you're not wrong in thinking that New York is just going to bite the bullet.
Well, great. You get to rock me to sleep again tonight.
What? How long I went?
No, for making me worry. Because usually you're the Pollyanna. It's like everything's going to be great. And when you go, no, there's every chance New York State could go, fine, we give.
Well, so it is more of, it's not a bad thing. It is just a stumbling block. It is a stumbling block only on the, if New York withdraws, that is a big darn state that is causing a whole lot of problems that will now be off the list. It'll also be Bloomberg's home state. Mm-hmm. And so,
I mean, true, we do win either way, but I want it to be a decisive win.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're winning a battle, not the war. And we would have the ground laid for the next battle, which would be, going after Illinois or New Jersey, or I said Hawaii might be the last holdout because, like I said, they just say no. So
I think California would probably be next because of all of Judge Benitez's doings.
Yeah, yep, and also again size. New York is a massive state. California is a massive state. They kind of anchor both sides of the country. So yeah, it would be very, very decisive to suddenly make both California and New York, there's a ton of guns that are shipped into those states every year. So it would be nice to make a change on that. So yeah, it would be a disappointment, just like NYSERPA versus the city of New York was a disappointment when it was mooted by the court. It would be interesting to see if that was going through. Furthermore, just because the law gets changed doesn't mean that the court case automatically gets mooted and dismissed. The Supreme Court could, in fact, continue to rule on the case for the sake of the case law, rather than just dismiss it. Even though after it was done, the state of New York gets nothing, but again, the country would get a ruling. So there's always that possibility as well.
They could, but monkeys could also fly out of my butt. Do you think that they will?
I mean, when they do, I want to be there.
I meant, do you think the court would rule in that case regardless?
I wouldn't put money on it, but it is a different court since the last time. So we'll see. Well, so there's another bit that I wanted to share, and I will tell you right now, I'm already determined it's going to be a little bit more work. So I don't know how long it'll take me to do this, but like I'm making an audio Fisk of this. But I found Colion Noir, in case you ever heard of him. He was on a podcast. You just watch the video. Do you remember what the podcast title was? I actually didn't listen to the beginning of it. No.
No, but I can find it for you in a minute. Actually, no. Because it was posted on Colion's channel, and so I'd have to sit there and listen to it to find out what podcast it was. So
I found it. There it is. Yep. So the podcast is called The Debate, and it's run by Newsweek, which is kind of interesting because they're kind of a defunct magazine. But essentially, what they do is they actually contact people from opposite sides of a heated debate subject, and call them in to debate the topic on the podcast. And so they picked Colion for one side, which, my God, good choice. Oftentimes you will see these debates. It will be just some random, C-list, supporter, versus some full on professional lobbyist. So in this case, it was one of those like, oh yeah, no, this is one of the heavyweights. I am more than comfortable being represented by Mr. Colion Noir. And then John Rosenthal, who's actually kind of a B-list as far as the gun control world. He's fairly well known here in Massachusetts, though his star is kind of set, but he was, you might have seen, back in the, like in the last 10 years, there used to be a giant billboard on the back of Fenway Park, which is where the Red Sox play. And you could see it from the I-95 highway or I-90 highway. And it would often say gun control saves lives, or various anti-gun sayings on the back of this massive billboard on a large highway. But he has since lost that billboard because of, I can't remember if he sold the property or what happened to it. But yeah, he is the head of, now I'm trying to I'm trying to remember the name of his group. It's not important, but he's Massachusetts guy. He was the head of the American Hunters and Shooters Association for a brief moment. That was the false flag anti-gun group that was pretending to be a pro-gun group in favor of Barack Obama. I don't know if you remember that group.
Vaguely. We've had a lot of stuff like that lately.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you remember, what was it, Smoke and Thunder?
Yeah.
But we digress.
Yes. But yeah, so needless to say, they sat down to have a debate. And spoiler alert, Colion was saying, one of the biggest problems with the gun control debate is there is no debate. And then he sits down with John Rosenthal, and there was no debate. It is just a bloodbath. I mean, John Rosenthal just ducks, dives, and then outright lies. I mean, there's one instance where he says that the Heller decision ruled that people could own firearms that were in common use in the 18th century. And it's one of those and literally one of the debate moderators, there are two moderators on here. I would assume because one of the moderators openly, admits that he owns a Daniel Defense rifle and he owns, several firearms and used to live in Texas and is a huge fan of the Heller decision and all that. He volunteers quite a bit of his background that shows that he is at least fairly interested in the Second Amendment debate. And the other moderator is a woman, and she doesn't really say anything about herself. So I don't know if they specifically set up two moderators and kind of have one be in each man's corner. But but he definitely comes back, they go to a commercial break, and when they come back, he's like, yeah, just so you know, I pulled up the Heller decision. I've read it a bunch of times, and then read the Heller decision back to him to point out the fact that no, he openly lied in the debate. So it was just absolutely a breath of fresh air, because most of the time when you see debates, especially on podcasts or YouTube videos or all that, people are throwing out facts and statistics, and there's not really any easy way to fact check it, especially since you can't put footnotes when someone's speaking, and nobody puts the big long list of notes like I do for my Weird Audio Fisks at the bottom of a YouTube channel. So you just kind of have to know what they're talking about or track down what they're trying to talk about. But in this case, literally he got called on a blatant lie. And then the show closes out in just the most spectacular fashion, in the fact that evidently the closing round of this podcast, I haven't listened to any other episodes of this, but the closing round is essentially they ask both people to state something that the two of them would agree on. And in the course of this, Colion, I mean, if you follow him at all, he is extremely against Bloomberg's universal background checks. He's stated that he's not against background checks per se, but he is against universal background checks. And John Rosenthal says, well, I think we could both agree that there should be a background check on every gun. And both of the moderators jump in, and you can hear the embarrassment in them because they're trying to run a debate, and they're like, no, you're supposed to talk about something literally just bad faith argument. You are literally just trying to smear him again, you're trying to score points for your team when that's not what's going on. And so and so it's just an absolute bloodbath. And again, Colion did an amazing job, but John Rosenthal lied and misrepresented stuff so many times that there's no way that Colion, in the time that he had, could pick them all up. So I'm going to end up doing a Weird Audio Fist, just like I did when it was Brian Strasser and Sarah Hoffman, then Sarah Cade from Gun Owners Caucus. He did it. He was debating somebody, and I was just like, look, I'm picking up the pieces here. There's some crumbs left over. I'll take the bits that he didn't get. So that's going to be in the future, but I highly recommend everybody watch it because it's a bloodbath and it's glorious.
Unless you're me and, like, don't need your blood pressure raised by idiocy and bad faith arguments. I just kind of skip to the end.
Yeah, it engages my prey drive. It's like those coyote calls that have like wounded rabbit or things like that. Just and the coyotes just come in going, "Oh man, that's going to be easy." If it sounds that bad, then it's not gonna have much fight left when I get it.
So hey, wounded prey.
Mm-hmm.
Chipman watch. Week 10, I think.
Aaron is never wrong. So I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball here because for those that have been following the show notes, and if you're not on the show, check out the show notes. There's a lot of cool stuff to read in there. He puts a lot of
work into those show notes. There are starving children in India who would love those show notes.
That's true. They have nothing to read but punk rock fanzines. They would love to read our show notes. You'll notice that in the show notes, especially on the Chipman Watch, I'm getting a lot of stuff from the website The Reload. And so, you know what? I contacted Stephen Gutowski, who runs that website. And you know what? We sat down and we talked about The Reload. And of course, we talked about David Chipman. I am so happy to welcome to the Assorted Calibers podcast, Stephen Gutowski, and he is the owner of The Reload, both podcast and website. How you doing, Stephen?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm awesome because I am a huge fan. I gotta say that it's the work that I've seen you do both on your podcast and your website is amazing, especially given that I've only recently discovered about you, and I discovered you pretty much in the beginning. So I wanted to know, tell me about The Reload and how it got started.
Nice. Yeah, well, so I've been reporting on guns, gun politics and policy for about a decade now. I was at the Washington Free Beacon before this. I've been on the cover of Time. I've won some awards. I won 2 Telly Awards for a show that I hosted over at the Free Beacon. And it came to a point where, a lot of people had started their own publications over on things like Substack, a lot of writers. And I thought that I had the opportunity to do something similar and try to create a publication that was specifically focused on gun reporting, because honestly, there's just not a lot of that out there right now. There's a few decent sites doing it, but you usually have sort of a dichotomy when it comes to gun coverage, where the mainstream outlets, major media outlets like the Washington Post or the New York Times or something like that, they might know a lot about what goes on the Hill and have good insight into whether or not a bill is going to move or not, but they don't know anything about guns usually, and oftentimes they know a lot of things that aren't true about guns, right? I guess it's the old Reagan quote. They know a lot of things that not only they know a lot of things that they're just not true is the problem. And then on the gun side, you have a lot of publications that know guns really well and do fantastic reviews, things like that they could do a way better job than I could reviewing a gun. I'm into guns. I like to build ARs and I'm a certified firearm safety instructor and all that. I carry all that stuff, but I'm not as up on the technical side of things or reviewing guns in the way that you see a lot of publications or YouTube channels or podcasts doing really well. But at the same time, a lot of those publications don't know the politics very well. You get a lot of focus on sort of fringe bills that go nowhere and have no chance of going anywhere, but people act like they will and freak out about it. And then that's sort of a recurring cycle over and over again. And you don't see a lot of original reporting coming out of those outlets either. And so that's why I thought there was space for something like The Reload, where I'm focused on hard news reporting, breaking stories, telling stories that really otherwise are going to go untold by major media outlets. For instance, this last week, I broke a story about David Chipman, the ATF nominee, and allegations of racism that have been levied against him. I was able to find ATF sources to corroborate the existence of these allegations, which hadn't come up explicitly in his confirmation hearing to that point, and caused a bit of a stir on Capitol Hill. The minority leader, Mitch McConnell, called for him to be withdrawn. The entire Republican caucus of the Judiciary Committee called for a new hearing on him. And so we'll see how much of an impact that has. Obviously, Republicans were already opposed to his nomination because of his history as a gun control activist, a paid gun control activist. But this is something that moved the needle, in terms of his nomination that really had an actual impact. And that's what the Reload is built to do: break stories that matter, whether it's on Capitol Hill or, for instance, I just did a piece where I went down to Florida for for the first gun makers match ever, where people built their own firearms, and then they had a shooting competition about it. And I interviewed a bunch of people there and experienced the match and wrote about that, which is something that you're not going to see a lot of outlets doing. So that's really what I've tried to bring to the table with this new venture. And then also we have a podcast as well, the Weekly Reload podcast, which really features long form interviews, 30-minute, 45-minute interviews with some of the, best experts out there, and people with interesting perspectives. So we've had like Charles Cook from National Review. I had Cam Edwards from Bearing Arms on this week to talk about David Chipman. I've had Tiffany Johnson to talk about minority gun owners and how the industry can better approach them. Those sorts of things. I think the real focus for me is, sober, serious firearms reporting and analysis.
Yeah, it's a really good podcast as well. I am an avid listener as well as an avid reader of the site. So
thank you.
You know what? While I got you here, since you're pretty much the lead breaking story on these allegations of racism against David Chipman. I haven't seen maybe I missed one of the details. Have you uncovered that there was an actual citation against him for these allegations? Like, was he taken up to ATF HR about this?
Well, so what we know now is that there were 2 complaints filed against him at the ATF's office for like equal opportunity. And one of those is alleged to be about the incident where he he said that, or he's accused of saying that too many black agents had passed an assessment to be put up for a promotion, and so that they must have cheated in order to do that. That's the allegation against him. That's what I was able to corroborate, that other agents had heard this allegation, because what happened was initially there was a FOIA lawsuit that came out last month, and they just had a single source say David Chipman said this thing, and it's part of these complaints. The complaints are confirmed because Senator Ted Cruz, the Republican from Texas, he asked Chipman in written questions about whether or not he had complaints against him while working at the ATF. And Chipman confirmed that he had 2 complaints, and that they had both, according to Chipman, they'd been resolved without reprimand. But nobody has seen the details of these complaints. The complaints are still sealed. They're not public. We don't know what's in them. And so I think the big thing my big takeaway from this part of the story, because there's more to it than just the allegations of racism. But my big takeaway from that part of it is that we should be able to see what's in these complaints. These complaints exist. The allegation is that they include a complaint of racist comments made by Chipman. So, he's not just an average citizen, right? He's up for director at an agency that has a lot of black agents. I think it's fair to say the public should be able to see what was in these complaints, how they turned out, what his defense is for these allegations. All of that still remains to be seen. He hasn't said anything. He hasn't denied them. He's just been completely silent. I reached out to, of course, the White House for a comment from him, and they just never responded. So I think the public deserves to see the complaints themselves and hear a full account for what happened. I mean, it's just basic transparency.
Yeah. Furthermore, I think a key point you also missed is he's about to be directing a law enforcement agency that is going to be enforcing laws. And in this current time of racial tension between law enforcement and people of color, that's all. Like, he will not only will he be directing agents of every race, but he will also be enforcing laws against people of every race. And the idea that he, and I mean, any sort of color that might say that, or any sort of allegation that might color that he might be prejudiced in dealing with people because of race is a bad deal.
Yeah.
So the big question, this is kind of an ongoing theory that I've been talking about during, we have an ongoing segment called Chipman Watch, and and it started out pretty grave because I've been following him for a long time because I follow the anti-gun groups, and Chipman has been an employee for Giffords, and he's been fairly vocal about it, and he's
and the gun control groups, of course. The only response we've gotten from the Chipman supporters on this story is the president of the Brady camp. Well, I guess it's Brady United now. They change their names all the time, but Brady United, I think, is what they're.
I believe so. It was just Brady for a little while, but I believe
it was Brady.
They quietly rolled out this new name.
Yeah. So regardless, the president of that organization, Chris Brown, came out and attacked the Reload, my publication, as an extremist rag, which was designed to peddle gun control or gun lobby lies. That's the phrase that she used. And then, of course, another prominent gun control activist repeated the exact same phrase. And interestingly, they both used the wrong form of pedal. They used the bike pedal instead of pedal as in like sell,
peddler,
or hawk something. So that's been the only real response we've gotten. All they said
what was the other gun control advocate? I'd seen Chris Brown, but
it was one of the Parkland fathers who's become very
was it Oliver?
No, he's a prominent gun control activist. He has obviously a terrible story, and he's entitled to his opinions, of course. But yeah, he repeated this same talking point, which was odd because he repeated it word for word. It definitely felt like it was something of a coordinated effort to try and discredit the report. All they really said is that the Reload's bad. Obviously, the Reload is completely reader funded, so it's not connected in any way to the gun lobby. Whatever they mean by that term, it's wholly funded by subscribers. So we don't take money from any gun rights or gun control group. So, I think that accusation is, just ridiculous on its head. But it was Fred Gutenberg.
Okay.
By the way, was the and he has like 500,000 followers. Mm-hmm. He's very, very prominent gun control activist. But regardless, and I think anyone who follows the Reload, you've read the pieces, you've read my writing. You can see that I'm not some extremist who just likes to yell talking points at people, right? That's not what the Reload is about. That's not how my career has played out. And, so I just think that they're kind of flailing. They didn't really have any response. They just said that the sources are anonymous, which not all of the sources were anonymous either. We also had former agent Vasquez who talked about how Chipman, because this story wasn't just about these accusations of racism. There's other problems that these agents had with David Chipman. There were 3 agents, one on record, and they talked about how he's has this reputation as a bully. They're worried about reprisals. That's why 2 of them didn't want to be on the record, because they were concerned that if he becomes director, mm-hmm. he could extract some sort of retribution on them. One was the current agent is concerned that he could be reassigned to far-reaching posts, including like our island territory, because the director has the power to do that. He doesn't have as much power to just fire people necessarily, because there's protections for federal workers for things like that, but he can move people around.
You could take someone who's rooted in, who's lived their entire life in Georgia, mm-hmm. and all the families there, and say, hey, guess what? You need to check out the gun stores in Guam.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. And so And then the third one, they also have concerns about his turn to gun control because two of these agents, including the one on record, worked with Chipman at the ATF when he was there. And they said, when he worked at the ATF, he didn't have these anti-gun views or these gun control views. And those didn't develop until afterwards when he went and started to work for the gun control groups, or at least he wasn't open about them when he was working at the ATF. And that concerns a lot of these guys. I think one of them called him, a sort of Manchurian candidate type because it's a fairly close-knit community of former ATF agents, right? There's not that many ATF agents. They're smaller than the U.S. Capitol Police Force. Which I think a lot of people don't realize this, but and a lot of there's sort of a dichotomy. I know there's obviously a lot of distaste for the ATF inside the gun community in large degree, and some of it's obviously earned for some of these awful tragedies over the years, like Waco and Ruby Ridge and things of that nature. But there is this dichotomy within the agency. You've got the ATF agents, the field agents, who do the actual work of arresting, gun runners and people that shouldn't have guns, like criminals,
and the agents that inspect gun shops. I always say whenever there's a lot of talk about gun control, I have to say talk to anybody who has an FFL and ask them what they think of the agent that they deal with for compliance and inspection. And I have almost never heard. There might be one. I can't think of one off the top of my head who has, and I know dozens of people who hold FFLs, and every single one of them was like, yeah, the agent was awesome. They're really good. They're helpful. They're nice. So right. Yeah, there is a dichotomy.
And there's those guys who tend to be fairly pro-gun guys. Like they like guns. They own a lot of guns themselves. And that's what these sort of the agents that talk to me, they're kind of like those type of guys. And then there's the administrator types who don't actually do the casework. In fact, it's not clear that Chipman ever did a case, like wrote a case while he was at the ATF. He was often in these more administrative roles. And so those guys, you see this disconnect in law enforcement a lot, whether it's, big city police chiefs versus your average beat cop or more, cops from smaller towns. There's definitely a big disconnect there on guns a lot of the time. And it's similar inside the ATF, I would say. And that's what these guys say. And then so there's a concern, too, because like you mentioned, the field agents have a real relationship with FFLs oftentimes. And that's a lot of the time how they get tips for like gun running operations, like actual, gun running operations that exist out there. FFLs, they need that relationship. They're not going to just know that there's some red flag that somebody might be, someone comes in and has known, buys a bunch of guns for the first time outside of their state in an area that's near like a high crime area, and they have weird answers when they talk to the FFL, why they're there, why they're what they're doing and all this stuff. Like if the FFL has a sense that this person is not legit, that they can alert the ATF or whatever the situation might be. Oftentimes ATF agents get tips on real cases from FFLs. And so they have to have that relationship. And so you bring in somebody like David Chipman, who is vocally pro gun control, wants to ban a lot of new guns, wants to put a lot of these sorts of businesses out of business. Mm-hmm. That has a detrimental effect, according to these guys, on that relationship. And it might hamper their ability to actually pursue legitimate cases. So that was another one of their concerns. Like they don't understand how this guy went to become this big gun control activist when he wasn't like that when they knew him at the ATF. And then they worry that his publicly stated positions are going to alienate a lot of the people they need to actually do their work as, ATF agents.
Well, that is amazing, and thank you so much for doing the work that you're doing. I advise everybody to check out the Reload. It is amazing work, and there's more to come. And of course, also you're listening to this podcast, so you might need another podcast to listen to. Check out Steven's the Reload podcast. It is amazing, and you've already heard some of the guests, and I vouch for it as well. So thank you so much, Steven, for coming on the Assorted Calibers podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I don't believe I've met him, but I did have the pleasure of corresponding with Mr. Gutowski. I think it was last year during the whole gun surge, and this was when he was still working for the Washington Free Beacon, and he asked me about that, and I was able to give him quite a detailed statement involving things like, well, you know, in my very small local gun store, well, we can still get shotgun ammo, but everything else is gone, and things like that. And, you know, and I gave him, he probably already knew it, but it was the whole, okay, so the NICS checks, those are only for states that don't have their own instant check system. And of course, if you have your concealed carry permit, you don't have to get one of those, and blah, blah, blah. So I am familiar with him. He's a very, very smart man.
Yes. Yeah, he's great. And he is, I mean, just digging into all of these stories about David Chipman. And of course, we've got links to the Reload in the show notes. And oh boy, I mean, David Chipman is a hot mess. And well, of course, we've got calls for him to be withdrawn. I'm like, don't do it. Don't do it. Keep him out there. Keep it going as long as you can. But there's also the talk about having a second hearing. And I hope this does happen, especially now with all the talk of their, I mean, everyone now knows more about his lost firearm. I don't think that was particularly well known in the first hearing, and now these allegations of racism. There is talk about sexual harassment. I don't know how true that is. I heard that early on, but I also heard that from the same initial source that talked about the racist comments that David Chipman made, and so I think that could be a whole lot more fun.
I wouldn't put it past him. I mean, he's already shown himself to be a very awful kind of person. He's a bully. I don't know if we could prove it in a court of law, but it's very heavily implied that he's a racist. He's careless. He got his gun stolen. So, you know, we've established a pattern of behavior. Sure, I can believe he sexually harasses people in the office. Why not?
Yep. And just like we said about the NYSERPA story, is if you can frame the debate in the right way, you could definitely convince people who might not otherwise be your friend on there. You've just got to figure out what's important to them. And we always joke about yelling shall not be infringed because it is the most worthless thing you can say as a Second Amendment advocate. Not because it's not important. It absolutely is important, but it is only important to Second Amendment advocates. If somebody knows and understands shall not be infringed and that has the meaning and importance to them, that is somebody who is saying, yeah, we need to repeal the NFA. We need to make it so that you can buy machine guns right next to the 22 target pistols. And, you know, it's not an issue. Then when you come to somebody like from the author of The Nation, he doesn't believe that it's a right to own a gun. And there are people that do that. But does he believe that white people and rich people should have rights that people of color and people who are not rich have? Probably not. Well, guess what? That's what the state of New York is doing with their shall issue permitting system or may issue permitting system, and the same thing goes with like Chipman. You know, my letter to Elizabeth Warren. Don't know if it fell on deaf ears or just appeared that way, but yeah, You love gun control. You're totally fine with a Giffords lobbyist being the head of the ATF. But are you fine with someone who used to work for Michael Bloomberg? And are you fine for someone who is a corporate lobbyist working there? And then are you fine with someone being a law enforcement agent who has made racist comments in his past? You can frame stuff around and make friends in other ways, because something is important to everybody. So I also wanted to round off Chipman Watch with two more stories. Just go briefly is the this one is from National Review, and the title says it all. Apparently David Chipman isn't crazy about the First Amendment either. And it's going off on a let's see, where did he say this? It was a 2019 BBC interview where he was frustrated about the freedom of speech. And this is, he says, the FBI and other federal agents have a tough job responding to these threats when they don't currently have the authority to remove weaponry just because people are saying hateful things. And so, and this is really something, I mean, I've always pointed out, I've called, anti-gun groups anti-freedom activists, because we've got stuff like, issues where we want to come in and search your house to make sure that you don't have illegal guns, or make sure that you're not illegally storing guns. You need to submit to inspections. And of course we've got, things like red flag laws or all that, where someone can just say, oh, you were saying something I didn't like, and so therefore you're posing a danger. So yeah, it is not a surprise that somebody as anti-gun as David Chipman would also be against many other freedoms that we hold dear. And I'll close out on this last one. Is the National Sheriff Association tells Biden that they oppose Chipman's nomination to lead ATF. This is from the Gun Writer, and there's not really a whole lot going to it. Just the National Sheriff's Association's come out against this. Of course, Chipman used to be a lobbyist for the Fraternal Order of Police, and I believe they have come out in favor of him. Let's see. And the one big thing to point out is that it's in the last paragraph. Chipman has received support from two law enforcement organizations, but both represents chiefs of police who are appointed by city officials, as opposed to county sheriffs who are elected to the office of the public. And this cuts to a standard issue. And of course, Stephen Katowski said it great with the fact that there's a dichotomy within the ATF itself. Talk to anybody who runs a gun shop or otherwise has an FFL, they will say the ATF agent that does their compliance stuff and helps them with their paperwork and all that, they're super duper nice people. They're really, really cool. I mentioned that Say Uncle noted that he was getting a whole bunch of traffic from the ATF office, and was just like, oh, I wonder if they're looking for me, and literally got an email the next day saying, no, we read your blog on our lunch breaks, because we work for the ATF because we're a bunch of gun nuts. We like guns, so we're working for the gun agency. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's really, really cool. And the same thing goes with you might live in anti-gun town. I lived in Medford, Massachusetts, and they literally told me you can't have a carry permit. We only issue restricted permits. And there was an officer that I knew there, beat officer, that's like, yeah, that's crap. That's absolutely crap. I don't agree with that, because he was a beat officer and he knew that criminals don't care. They're going to own guns. They're going to carry guns. They're already doing illegal stuff anyway. So it doesn't matter. After the first felony, all the others are free. And so the only people that it's hurting are the law-abiding citizens who just want to protect themselves. So yeah, this does not come as a surprise that a law enforcement group that either represents the electorate, be it the sheriffs who are elected people, or groups that represent the beat cops who are there in the trenches. Yeah, they're going to be just as much of not a fan of Chipman as the rest of us are.
I think you might have left just a little bit between his legs there, Weird. You sure you don't want to go back for one final pass?
There's always next week.
This next segment. Weird, you have made me listen to a lot of awful things over the years, and for the most part I've done them. But just How dare you make me listen to Keith Olbermann with my own ears? I just, you know what? No. In the immortal words of Tracy Morgan.
No. 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 Hell no. 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 I refuse. No. No.
I'm not sure if this Fisk is going to be fair game. I mean, Keith Olbermann used to be a big deal in political commentary back in the Bush and Obama years. But now he's little more than a YouTube influencer. According to his last broadcast for GQ magazine, he claims to be retired, which just means now he does the same crap he's done this whole time, only now just for free. But yes, gone are the high-dollar production studios, gone is the money. But Keith Olbermann is now saying dumb things about politics into his phone from his Manhattan balcony, in portrait mode. Will they ever learn? This rant, in case you couldn't guess, is on the Second Amendment.
Whether or not you meant to watch baseball's All-Star game, and who am I to judge you, remember that Saturday night police uncovered a stash of 16 long guns, body armor, and 1,000 rounds of ammunition in a Denver hotel room near where the game was to be played.
I didn't watch the All-Star game, or any other game of organized sports ball. This shouldn't surprise anybody who knows me. But like the astute Mr. Olbermann, I don't judge you for watching it, though honestly I don't get the stank he's putting on that. Also, I hadn't heard about the police raid either.
And then the FBI said they had no reason to believe this was connected to the All-Star game, and a lot of people relaxed and took this as good news, as if it's somehow okay that 4 people had stashed long guns, ammo, and body armor for any purpose other than shooting up the All-Star game like it was Las Vegas 2017, as if that's the way it's supposed to be, as if anybody should have 1,000 rounds of ammo and body armor, and they could then ask their Denver hotel for a room with a balcony for whatever reason.
Well, Keith didn't know at the time the reason for the FBI raid. Of course, there's no implication that this was at all okay. Hence the reason why there was a raid, and there were arrests, and this whole thing was covered by the news. It has since come to light that the arrested people were allegedly drug dealers who had taken up a side hustle of selling illegal guns. And not only were there weapons, ammo, and body armor, but also pounds of illegal drugs seized in the raid. Still, all that aside, Olbermann is assuming that having a bunch of guns and a bunch of ammo is somehow the prelude to mass murder. Of course, those arrested were prohibited people selling illegal stuff illegally. But how rare is it to check into a hotel room with a bunch of guns and ammo? Has Keith ever heard of 3-gun competitions? 2 competitors, their gear, backups, carry guns, and ammo could easily break the record of what was found in that hotel, and purely for benevolent reasons. But if anti-gun people didn't vilify gun owners, would they still be anti-gun?
So think about the All-Star game. Think about the Denver weapons stash a block away, which was either an interrupted All-Star game mass shooting or an interrupted non-All-Star game mass shooting.
Or a bunch of drug dealers who were selling guns. Here's an interesting take. I've yet to read about people growing opium poppies in a greenhouse in the United States. I hear they're growing them in Mexico now, and of course Afghanistan grows the bulk of the world's smack. Heroin is 100% illegal here in the United States. Yet these goons had a bunch of the stuff on them. So even if you make the argument that criminals get guns from legal gun owners, so disarming lawful gun owners will disarm the criminals, think about that heroin and how it got from Afghanistan to Denver, and imagine how that would work for guns.
And consider again the holy Second Amendment to the Constitution and ask yourself this question. Why doesn't the Second Amendment have the word own in it?
Wait, what?
Why does it not say the right to own guns or any synonym for own? Why does it just say a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed? Keep and bear, not own.
Let's take this scenario outside of the gun world. Hey, Xander.
Hey, Weer'd.
Just wanted to know I arrived safely in Boston. Thanks so much for having me over at your place this weekend.
Yeah, and you. By the way, I noticed when I was tidying up, you left a couple things here.
Oh, what'd I leave?
2 boxes of Lipton tea unopened.
Oh, yeah. Well, you can keep those.
Are you sure? I mean, you really like your tea.
No, Xander, you can keep them.
Hey, Weer'd.
Hey, David, just wanted to let you know we just landed in Logan Airport. Thanks so much for hosting us for the weekend.
Oh, it was my pleasure. You guys were great guests, even the little one. I did want to mention while you were here, you left something behind that I think you're going to miss.
Well, what was that?
Your shoulder holster.
You know what, David? You can keep it.
Seriously?
Yeah. I've actually got another one. That's my old one. You can keep it.
Okay. You insist.
So do you think either Xander or David is expecting me to take back what I left? Would it be reasonable for me to expect them to drop those items in the mail when they got a chance and send it back to me? While it isn't legally binding, there is court precedence for possession being 9/10 of the law. Furthermore, the militia was almost exclusively armed with private arms. Further, these early Americans were making guns as good as or better than the standard service weapons of the best militaries of their time. And I'm talking guns like the flintlock musket, the Kentucky rifle, cannons, and warships to mount those cannons. At the time of the founding, there were people making their livelihood hunting pirates with private warships under a letter of marque.
Keep doesn't mean own. Bear doesn't mean own. Yet by the same kind of logic that made lots of us breathe sighs of relief because maybe nobody meant to shoot up the fans at the All-Star game, our nation has been covered neck high in this stuff. That the Second Amendment makes gun ownership not only legal but sacrosanct.
Bear doesn't mean own, but keep sure does. Also, OLBERMANN doesn't want to point out that bear means carry, and his lovely home state of New York is currently being sued for not issuing carry permits to residents. So you can keep guns in Manhattan, but you sure can't bear them. But that is what the document says. And notice he keeps saying what it doesn't say, despite not having any logical or legal basis. But he's not saying what the founders were trying to say, if not to carry and own weapons. Further, you don't have to ask George Washington or Thomas Jefferson what they meant. Just ask the U.S. Supreme Court. Even the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg agreed that we have the right to own guns under the Second Amendment.
103 times the Constitution uses words like ownership, value, purchased, receipts, property, private property, but not once does it do so in the Second Amendment, because the Second Amendment isn't about gun ownership, it's about regulation of state militias,
who frequently mustered with their own personal firearms. At the time of the ratification of the Bill of Rights, gun ownership was so ubiquitous that the idea of somebody not owning a gun was bizarre, let alone saying someone couldn't legally own a gun. There were requirements for people to own guns and ammo in early America, and I mentioned in my last Fist, the University of Virginia required all students to have firearms, and if a student didn't have one would be provided by the university at no charge. OLBERMANN is telling us what he believes the Second Amendment doesn't say, but not what he thinks it does say. If he's saying it doesn't mean we can own our own guns, but we can have a militia, does that mean the government owns all the guns and issues them to the soldiers? You know, like the Army or the National Guard, which conveniently is what Prohibitionists claim the militia is now. Except the people who wrote the Second Amendment had just fought a war against their own government. The idea that these founding fathers thought King George should own all the guns is absurd. Further, while the gun prohibitionists scoff at Thomas Jefferson's quote about the Tree of Liberty being watered with the blood of patriots and tyrants, it takes on even more clarity when you note that in the same letter just before this quote, Jefferson wrote, "What country can preserve its liberties if their rulers are not warned from time to time that their people preserve the spirit of resistance?" Sounds like when the Second Amendment says the right of the people to keep and bear arms, the founders weren't playing the same stupid mental gymnastics that Mr. OLBERMANN is attempting.
Yet thousands of us die every year buried under this same crap, the same stuff that says if the 1,000 rounds of ammo in the Denver hotel room wasn't there to kill baseball fans, that somehow that's good news.
I mean, at this point, Keith is unhinged and beyond reason. No, the Second Amendment isn't bullshit, and gun control does not save lives. And while drug dealers selling guns and drugs out of a hotel room is hardly good news, There are many other homes and hotel rooms out there with dozens of guns and thousands of rounds of ammo, and no crimes being committed and no lives are being harmed. Of course, Keith wishes they were crimes. Those are your anti-gun talking points and a few rebuttals to combat them.
Okay, so there's a concept of the punchable face. OLBERMANN has the punchable voice. He drives me to psychosis when I hear him, because it's almost always one of the first things out of his mouth is some sort of smarmy or bad faith or ill-educated or throwing shade, and it's just, shut up!
I mean, it really is that magical combination of arrogance and ignorance. It doesn't say to own guns. And it's one of those like, yeah, it does. yeah, it does. That's exactly what it says. Why would you think it's not? And it's just, he thinks he's being so clever when he's being so stupid.
What? What does he think keep means? Yeah, I know. It's something about the militia, blah, but how can someone be so aggressively stupid? How can someone think that keep doesn't mean own?
I almost want to say that he's just so dense that he thinks that if he just tells us something that he knows is jive, that we'll just believe it and go away. And I'll tell him that it doesn't mean that we can own guns, and then we'll win.
That, the big lie repeated long enough and often enough, people will start to believe it. Good night.
Yeah. So I'm sorry you had to listen to that with your own ears, but it was so over the top that I had to attack it. I had to grab it by the throat.
I feel dirty. I'm going to have to go bathe and lie now.
Oh. This is a chemical burn.
Exactly. It's the only way to feel clean.
But you know who's clean and
our
pretty
patrons.
And fresh smelling?
Our patrons, right?
Our patrons, each and every one of them, as well as our listeners. Our listeners are also clean and fresh smelling. And you know what? Downright attractive. And if you are downright attractive and you smell fresh, you might want to become a patron to the show. So to become one, you need to go to patreon.com/SortedCalibers to sign up. You can get an early release of the podcast, plus you can get bonus content like the hilarious blooper reels, the ACP film tracks, and the ACP mag dump.
Also, please remember to rate us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe to us on the platform of your choice, and share the show with your friends, both online and off. Unless they're Keith OLBERMANN, in which case, frig.
And you can get more from me at my blog. That's weirdworld.com. And you can hear me weekly on Handgun Radio on the Firearms Radio Network.
And just to be clear, I don't mean stuff them as in intercourse. I mean fudge them as in that. That's what I mean.
You mean weird because he has to bleep all this shit.
Yes, I do. And you know where else you can find me? You can find me at Lurkin Rhythmically and Blue Collar Prepping and Pink Pistols and Operation Blaze Sword.
Aaron, you. And Nate Spencer, who does our music.
So he in the whereas I in the our is assorted, and so is our podcast. Good night.
Good night.